You know what nobody tells you about war? It's not the explosions that haunt you forever. It's not even watching your friends die. It's something much quieter, much more insidious, and it's been eating away at millions of veterans for decades. My uncle just started therapy at 77 years old for Vietnam, 57 years later, and what he told me will change how you think about every veteran you've ever met. Picture this. You're 20 years old. Yesterday you were worried about college exams and weekend parties. Today you're holding someone's life in your hands with 10 weeks of medical training. Being called a brain surgeon in the middle of a jungle where everything wants to kill you. That was my uncle's reality in Vietnam as an Army medic. Bronze Star with Combat 5. A hero by any measure. But heroes don't always come home whole. The war within starts with something psychologists call moral injury. It's different from PTSD, though they often dance together in the minds of veterans. PTSD comes from trauma you experienced. Moral injury comes from things you did, things you witnessed, or things you failed to do that violated your deepest beliefs about right and wrong. For combat medics like my uncle, this creates an impossible psychological prison. Imagine being trained to save lives, taking an oath to do no harm, then being handed a weapon and told to kill. My uncle carried an M16 and medical supplies. Some days he'd use his hands to stop bleeding and save a soldier's life. Other days he'd use those same hands to end someone else's. The human brain isn't designed to flip that switch repeatedly without consequences. But here's what makes it even worse for medics. They carry what's called survivor's responsibility. Every person they couldn't save becomes a ghost that follows them home. My uncle still remembers the names, the faces, the last words of soldiers who died in his arms despite his best efforts. He carries their dog tags in his memory like stones in his chest. The silence is probably the cruelest part. These men came home to a country that either ignored them or vilified them. There were no parades, no heroes' welcome, no understanding. They were told to be grateful they survived and move on. So they buried everything deep and tried to build normal lives on top of psychological mass graves. My uncle worked construction for 40 years, raised a family, seemed fine on the outside. But inside he was fighting a war that never ended. The hypervigilance that kept him alive in Vietnam made peace feel dangerous. He'd scan every room he entered for exits. Loud noises sent him into combat mode. He couldn't sleep deeply because deep sleep meant death in the jungle. The isolation is crushing. How do you explain to your wife why you wake up screaming? How do you tell your children why you can't handle 4th of July fireworks? How do you describe the weight of carrying 20 different versions of yourself, each one frozen at the moment someone died in your arms? Many veterans turn to alcohol or drugs, not for fun, but for silence. Anything to quiet the voices, the memories, the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. Some become workaholics, staying busy to avoid being alone with their thoughts. Others withdraw completely, building walls so high that even love can't reach them. The statistics are staggering. Veterans die by suicide at nearly twice the rate of civilians. But here's what those numbers don't capture. The slow-motion suicide of living half a life for decades. The marriages that crumble under the weight of unspoken trauma. The children who grow up with fathers who are physically present but emotionally unreachable. What finally pushed my uncle to therapy wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. He realized he was dying anyway, just very slowly. At 77, he decided he wanted to actually live the years he had left instead of just surviving them. It took courage that most people will never understand to walk into that therapist's office. The treatment isn't about forgetting or moving on. It's about integration, learning to carry the memories without being crushed by them, understanding that the 20-year-old soldier who did impossible things under impossible circumstances deserves compassion, not judgment, even from himself. Modern therapy for veterans includes techniques our soldiers never had access to: EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, group sessions with other veterans who understand the specific language of military trauma. But perhaps most importantly, it includes permission to feel everything they've been holding back for decades. My uncle told me something profound last week. He said the hardest part about finally talking wasn't reliving the memories. It was realizing how much life he'd missed while carrying them alone. How many moments of joy he'd pushed away because he didn't feel worthy of happiness when so many others never came home. If you know a veteran, understand that their silence isn't strength. It's survival. They're not being dramatic when they say war never ends. For them, it doesn't. It just moves from the battlefield to the breakfast table, from the jungle to the suburbs, from 20 years old to 77. The bravest thing my uncle ever did wasn't earning that Bronze Star in Vietnam. It was walking into therapy 57 years later, and finally asking for help with the war he's been fighting alone in his mind ever since.